Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting to you from Washington, D.C. Now, we are in the final 4 to 5 weeks of the U.S. election campaign, and we are approaching moments of decision. We've just had the Pence versus Kaine debate, that is to say, Republican vice presidential candidate and governor of Indiana Mike Pence versus Virginia Senator and Democratic vice presidential candidate Tim Kaine. That was already this week. I guess I should say a couple of words about that, but let's get right to the heart of the matter. We'll double back on Pence and Kaine in just a minute. The day after you hear this, that is to say, this program is generally broadcast on the 8th of October here on GCN, and I would invite everybody to pay special attention to the Sunday evening, 9 p.m. Eastern, town hall event, kind of a debate, but a town hall format encounter, we might say, between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, because that may be yet another of these absolutely critical watershed moments in the campaign. And there is no better way, perhaps, to introduce all this than to call your attention to what I think amounts to a landmark article in the New York Times of it's posted on the 5th of October, 2 days ago now. Since I'm recording here, we're recording on the afternoon of Friday, October 7th. This is entitled, Donald Trump Slip in the Polls Has GOP Worried About Congress. Now, I was able to discuss this to some degree in the American System daily broadcast, which I recommend that everybody listen to, right? There are people here, however, who are not part of the American System audience. I urge you to join the American System audience as fast as you can, because we actually had a thorough discussion of this practically the very same day. So you would have known all about this, right? You would have been up on all of it. But here's the idea. Jonathan Martin and Alexander Burns have talked to a broad cross-section of people in the Republican Party, and they are alarmed by the shift in the polls, tectonic, as some would say, that the shift in the polls, which has occurred after the September 26th first presidential debate between Hillary Clinton and Trump. And they are very worried about the possible outcome now in St. Louis. So just a couple of ideas from this article, which I think this establishes, I think, what the real dynamic is, right? We don't always like the New York Times, by the way, but sometimes with their resources, they can provide some interesting things. So what do we find from Martin and Burns? We are told that, first of all, should Mr. Trump falter badly in his second debate with Hillary Clinton on Sunday in St. Louis, Republican congressional candidates may take it as a cue to flee openly from their nominee. And this comes from two top Republicans involved at high levels of the campaign. I guess that means the Republican presidential, the Trump-Pence campaign. Again, the Republican, if Trump does badly in the St. Louis debate, Republican congressional candidates, now this is Senate and House primarily, may take it as a cue to flee openly from their nominee, according to these two top GOPers, and they have to be anonymous for obvious reasons. Here, this article calls attention to slippage by Trump in Pennsylvania, quite large slippage and considerable slippage also in Florida and North Carolina. He has to win all of those to have the proverbial path to victory. Now, we've talked a lot about polls. We've warned you about Brand X polls, right? We've sent you repeatedly to that article by Nate Silver, 538, when he was still working for the New York Times back in November 2012, just a few days after the conclusion of the Obama-Romney campaign. And you'll remember that the polls in that contest essentially skewed in favor of Romney. There was a bonus coming from many of these polls of 2, 3, 4%. We pointed out that the Gallup poll appeared as an outlier. It appeared to diverge from the other group of polls. We also pointed out that the Rasmussen poll it does have a tendency, which some observers have pointed to give an extra couple of points to the Republican nominee. So don't take my word for it. Go and look at that article from Nate Silver back in the New York Times. Right? Again, I want you to laminate that and keep it on the armchair, on the the armrest of your armchair. So when you go through this stuff, you'll have it all there, and you won't be disillusioned. You won't be stampeded. You won't be cowed, gulled, duped, or any of those other things that we don't want to be. However, that is another dimension which we really haven't talked about here because we have scarcely access to it. I mentioned it once or twice, I think, in the past. There's also private polling. In other words, when you have a campaign and you have a pollster, you really need to know how you're doing, right? Because you can, if you realize in advance that you're having a terrible time with this or that group, or that something that you keep saying is grating on the electorate, then you need to change that. So there's a level where the private polling, that is to say, the polling which is commissioned inside the campaigns. In other words, the Hillary Clinton group has a pollster. Trump has various pollsters, no doubt. And what do they say? What are the findings that they have? Well, according to this interesting article here from Martin and Burns, we are told that in the private polling of both parties, there is an even more precipitous drop, a more extreme decline in the support for Trump. In other words, whatever you see on Real Clear Politics, whatever Rothenberg says, whatever Cook says, whatever Sabotage says, whatever some of these others say, it's actually worse for Trump. Private polling by both parties shows an even more precipitous drop. What are the main groups? Independent voters, okay? The people in the middle. We've often called them fussy. And here, if you're going to be fussy, please do it now. Moderate Republicans. Okay, this often comes down to the college-educated Republican matrons of the suburbs of Philadelphia or of other cities of Chicago, I'm sure, and Denver and what have you, right? There are the suburbs of people who are reasonably well-to-do, reasonably well-educated. They want to see themselves as enlightened, right? They cannot participate in the campaigns of insults, right? They don't want to be associated with those. And women. So independents, independent voters, moderate Republicans, and women are tending to desert the Republican ticket. And here we talk to, the New York Times talked to Liesl Hickey, Republican strategist involved in House races in swing states. And what she detects is a sudden exodus. And we'll get back and investigate that sudden exodus here in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Back to World Crisis Radio. Now, as you will have gathered already, this is a weekly broadcast here, and we do the very best we can. But if you want to get to the heart of the matter, right, if you want to learn the actual mechanics of the absolute idea up close and be part of the defense of the First Amendment, freedom of the speech, freedom of press, if you want to give some oxygen to the famous canary in the coal mine, that would be yours truly, of the First Amendment, then please go on over to americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv, and subscribe, right? Join it at whatever level you want. There's a level of supporting activism. It's quite modest. Please go and do that. It's the same price as a couple of trips to Starbucks. So I respectfully ask for your support in that regard, because that is one of the main ways you can help us. Now, let's get back to this current situation. We're looking at the Republican and Democratic candidates meeting in St. Louis on Saturday. Meet St. Louis on Sunday evening, 9 p.m. And that's going to be for a town hall sort of event. And that's going to be, that's going to be make it a guess for the Republican in particular. Mrs. Clinton, I think, has more reserves to fall back on, so that a possible reverse for her, which I consider certainly less likely, right, given the apparatus that she has, she would be able to fall back on various resources and quite possibly recover. But as the New York Times is telling us, there are numbers of Republican candidates populating that now legendary down ballot status space. The people are looking for coattails, right? They want the presidential candidate to have coattails so they can ride into office on the coattails of their presidential candidate, and they're finding that they can't. So they now face the hour of decision. But let's stick, if we can, to this stuff from the New York Times. One of the most interesting articles in many a year. You remember Lisa Hickey, Republican strategist, dismayed by a sudden exodus of independent voters in more diverse parts of the country. So the Northeast, the Midwest, and California, I'm sure. So all of that. Quote from Mrs. Hickey: "They are really starting to pull away from Trump, and we're now entering what she calls uncharted territory." And of course, because the idea of college-educated white men in the suburbs, college-educated white women in the suburbs not voting, not overwhelmingly for the Republican candidate, is a novelty. In other words, this is not what you generally see. You may remember that one of the in the bad old days of the Southern strategy, 68 to 08, you'll remember that the typical Republican voter was a man, a Southerner. He was either rural or suburban. He may be an evangelical Christian. There were, of course, women too, but you get the idea. That was one of the sort of privileged, or I can say, categories that were especially important. How privileged they were is anybody's guess. I don't think they got much out of these votes, right? I think they were voting against their own interests, like a lot of other people. And we're told by somebody who has heard this, reporting a rumor from Mitch McConnell of Kentucky. A number of Republican senators, including Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, the majority leader who wants to know, he is concerned that Mr. Trump might not have bottomed out yet and could lose even more support among women, according to a Republican official who spoke on the condition of anonymity to recount a private conversation. Doesn't mean it was directly with Mitch. Another problem for the Republicans is what the New York Times chooses to call the steady, if unspectacular, performance by his running mate, Governor Mike Pence of Indiana, on Tuesday, failed to quiet their nerves. And this now has implications for the Senate, first of all. And I assert, me, Tarpley, look down the road a little bit. This same kind of fear will be creeping into the well of the House. So this is a guy who is willing to be quoted. Neil Newhouse, Republican pollster, quote, 2 weeks ago I would have said Republicans could hold control of the Senate, but there's just so many seats up and nobody is getting separation. The separation means when you have two candidates, if they're bunched together in the polling, right, say within the margin of error of the poll, you really can't tell who's ahead. But when the margin gets to be up at 7 or 8 or 10 or 15 points, then you can see. For example, here in Maryland, we have clear separation for Mrs. Clinton in the form of a 36-point lead over Trump here in the old line state. Obviously one of the most democratic of all states, so not at all typical, but nevertheless there it is. That's separation. I'm just bringing that as an example to say this is what separation actually means. So the Republicans are complaining that they're not getting separation, right? They're just not. No separation. We're close to Election Day. You're not seeing that separation because you're wondering what the impact of the top of the ticket really is on these voting groups, right? So a lot of these Republicans are going to be watching this debate with bated breath. They're going to be tuning in with excruciating attention because they think they can see some of their own supporters, their own supporters responding to some of these things, and then what, right? So what is that going to be? Therefore, that's really a mouthful. That the private polling is worse than the public polling, that the independents, the moderate Republicans, and the women are exiting the scene, right? They're going away from Trump, that Pence is no help, and that it's all a lot of it is going to come down to what happens on Sunday night. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., appealing to you once again. Keep up with the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. Keep your eyes on that canary in the coal mine, me. If I go down, First Amendment is in big trouble, and we'll be able to be somewhat more specific about some of these things in some time. But so please bear with me. You know who I am, right? I'm not the establishment, so make no mistake. Don't listen to those noxious voices that you may hear from time to time. What we have to look at now is the consequences of this whole thing, right? Because what we've just heard is that the Republican Party may go through another round of splitting starting on Sunday, depending on what happens, right? If the performance is not adequate from the point of view of these really worried and really jittery Republican down-ballot candidates, right? Meaning so many senators, so many people in the House of Representatives, then things could really begin to happen. And, of course, we saw splintering before the Republican convention. We saw splintering in the primary. We've seen all these lists of people, right? 50 or was it 70 Republican experts in foreign policy and related things who say that they cannot support this ticket. We had there's an ad around here aimed at Virginia, I think, which shows you people like Senator Flake and Senator Collins and Romney and Ben Sass and, again, some people in Congress. And they all say, we can't support this ticket. We've had all these newspapers the Cincinnati Enquirer, the Dallas Morning News, the Arizona Republic, especially vehement. They really lay it on the line, essentially saying that they cannot support the Republican ticket. Some of them, for the first time in a very long time. The Atlantic Monthly this past week, for the first time since, I think, Abraham Lincoln, has come out against a candidate, right, against the Republican ticket. Excuse me. And so you have all this splintering. At the convention, there was splintering, right? You remember that some people wanted to have, minority reports presented to the convention, the Republican convention, and voted on. We had the fact that Cruz, the number 2 vote getter, refused to endorse the ticket, which then emerged. Of course, he is now flip-flopped later on. The one that I would attach some special importance to as a harbinger of further splintering is this question of the 30 former members of Congress. And some of these I think are probably worth going through, right? The text is generally, we can't support the Republican ticket. Steve Bartlett of Texas, they're all former members of the House, except 1 or 2 senators, too. Steve Bartlett, Republican of Texas, Bob Bauman of Maryland, Sherwood Boehlert from upstate New York, Jack Bushner of Missouri, Tom Campbell of California, Bill Klinger, Pennsylvania, Tom Coleman, Missouri, Jeff Davis, Republican of Kentucky, Mickey Edwards of Oklahoma, an outspoken and prominent guy during his time here, Harris Falwell, Illinois, Ed Foreman, Texas and New Mexico, Amo Houghton. Now, this is an interesting guy, right? Amory Houghton was the congressman from Lockport, right, near Buffalo. And Houghton, that's the Corning Glass fortune, right? So that's a liberal Republican. Gordon Humphrey was the guy who walked out of the Republican National Convention, and he was asked, what group was in control, and he said something about fascism, if you remember that. So he's now saying, as a former senator from New Hampshire, of course, that he can't go through with it. Bob Inglis of South Carolina, Jim Colby of Arizona, Steve Kuykendall of California, Jim Leach. Well, Jim Leach was a very influential guy in making financial policy, but, gold is where you find it. Hey, Pete McCloskey of California. Now, there's a name to be proud of. Pete McCloskey was the guy who ran against Nixon in the Republican primary of 1972 on an anti-war platform. And Nixon, you can read Nixon's biography, he said, that guy gave me so many headaches. He really twisted me out of shape, and on and on and on. Pete McCloskey was also the first guy to call for the impeachment of Nixon after the Saturday Night Massacre of October 1973, right, when Nixon fired the special prosecutor Archibald Cox, and then he fired the guys in the Department of Justice who wouldn't, do what he wanted until they got to Bork, and then Bork was the guy who went along with it. And, of course, that put a cloud over Bork's future, right? So later on, he was borked. Connie Morella, right here, liberal Republican from Montgomery County, Maryland. Mike Parker, Mississippi. Tom Patry, Wisconsin. John Porter, Illinois. That guy was influential. Claudine Schneider of Rhode Island. John, alias Joe Schwartz of Michigan. Chris Shays, another liberal Republican. The last one in Connecticut, I think. Peter Smith of Vermont, Edward Weber of Ohio, Vin Weber of Minnesota. He stayed on. He's a lobbyist. G. William Whitehurst of Virginia. I don't think that's the one from the Whitehurst Freeway, but we're checking. And Dick Zimmer of New Jersey. So they are all out there saying this ticket is unacceptable. So the splintering clearly goes on with all those publications, all those editors, all those magazines, all these politicians, some of them, still in office and so forth. So I think this is now reaching a kind of critical mass. So what do we find in terms of the polling? I think in effect it's that there is now a Democratic lead. There's a lead for the Democratic national ticket. There's also a lead for the Democrats in quite a number of races. We're going to be paying more and more attention now as the weeks go on to the down ballot. Right now, the official Real Clear Politics is Clinton 40.3, Trump 43.8. So it's 4.5 points in effect. And then if we look at of course, where we have to look, which is in the actual electoral college, in the battleground states, we find there are really about 7 of these. But Clinton ahead in Florida. According to this, Trump back ahead in Ohio. We'll have to check that. Pennsylvania, a growing lead for Mrs. Clinton. New Hampshire, a 5-point lead for Mrs. Clinton. She's ahead in North Carolina. She's ahead in Colorado. She's ahead in Nevada. Wisconsin, 5-point lead for Hillary. Minnesota, 4.3. Trump is ahead in Iowa. That's his one consolation. Michigan, significant 5 or 6 point lead for Hillary. Virginia, a 7-point lead for her. Maine, a 2.5 point lead. Arizona going for Trump. Arizona, considered a battleground state in itself, is already not good. So you get the idea. That's the way it's going, and we're heading towards a moment of truth on Sunday night. Back in a minute. Welcome back, World President here in Washington, D.C. Once again, please visit AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv, and for a token fee, you get yourself into the day-to-day, Monday through Thursday world of everything that's going on that I'm able to follow. Now, let's go back and take a look at this question of this Pence versus Kaine debate. I said that Kaine is the winner. Kaine struck me as the winner. You can go and see exactly when I did. There's a bunch of Twitters from me. We live tweeted that one. There were others live tweeting, so we felt that we might. I say that he is Saturnine. In other words, in the Middle Ages, right, they assigned these qualities to the planets. And Saturn, well, the problem with Saturn was that it was so far from the sun, it moved the slowest, it was the coldest, and therefore, if you were born or influenced by Saturn, then you became Saturnine. The U.S. politician who had been called Saturnine in recent times is, as far as I can recall, principally Bob Dole. Bob Dole. So Bob Dole of Kansas, conversant with the various forces in the world grain market and the ones who dominate that. But he was Saturnine, and that he had a very sharp wit. In the case of Pence, it's not so much like that. But here's what Saturnine offers for synonyms, right? So slow and gloomy, somber, melancholy, moody, lugubrious, dour, glum, morose, unsmiling, humorless, a Saturnine temperament. I think that captures something about Governor Pence. Now, here's the problem. I found this was one of the most Orwellian moments of recent U.S. political history, when after this debate, which seemed to me to be a very clear example of a triumph of Senator Kaine, right? As a decent person, someone who was reasonably optimistic, affable, well-informed, obviously with all the problems of a, mainstream Democrat, or maybe even a left of centrist or vaguely left of centrist Democrat now that, things have come this far. But all the media characters came out and said, oh, look, Pence is the winner. And I was so surprised. Rachel Maddow and Joy Reid and all the leftists on MSNBC and so many on CNN. And they all came out and said Pence is the winner. On what? On style. On style. Because Kaine was abrasive and Kaine interrupted. Well, yes, he interrupted because of the obvious tendency of Pence to try to take the floor with a ponderous filibuster that would have eaten up the clock and crowded out any points, right? It is a well-known axiom that when you're dealing with people of the oligarchical persuasion, if I may say, you can't sit there and let an oligarch attack you according to his plan. You've got to do something to knock that off balance, right? To disrupt it a little bit. And it seems to me that is what Governor Kaine rather successfully did do. So he was trying to prevent a filibuster, and he was also objecting to this Orwellian quality. I was very glad to see there were one or two people who objected to this, right? Chuck Todd on MSNBC said maybe this wasn't such a great performance by Pence. But principally, Lawrence O'Donnell, gold is where you find it. Lawrence O'Donnell, who came out and said that he emphatically did not share the view of his colleagues that Pence had won the debate and that he would have to postpone his commentary on that until the following night, which was Wednesday. And indeed, he did go back to this issue. And the word from O'Donnell, paraphrasing now, is he said, yeah, you could declare Pence the winner, but you'd have to declare at the same time that lying doesn't count, that telling the truth is of no importance, that distortions, prevarications, and all the rest of it are just as good as anything else, provided you do it with a certain amount of style. So this is just crazy. These are vital questions of national interest. We cannot have these dilettantes of the news business, many of them, with a very superficial grasp of what's actually happening, because I don't think they want to know it. You can't have them skewing people. I think we got out of the O'Donnell show that there were a couple focus groups. One focus group was composed of people who watched the debate, and then when the debate was over, their TV was turned off, and they were asked what they thought about the debate and who they thought had won. Kaine was the winner. Then there was another group which watched the debate, and then they watched the blather coming from, again, these surprising leftists who, I don't know what happened to them on the way to the forum that night, but they came out in favor of Pence. I'll tell you what I think happened. And sure enough, the focus group that saw this media scrum and blather in favor of Pence, they also said, yeah, that's what we think too. Pence also, right? So highly suggestible, other directed, unfortunately, but then subjected to what they didn't need to be subjected to. So I think that I thought Kaine was the winner the whole time. Now, what actually happened, a couple of things behind the scenes. One is that the media have a vested interest in preserving the illusion of a horse race where there is none. And I think we are rapidly, maybe we've even attained this point, or we may be about to get to it, maybe Sunday night or sometime next week maybe. I don't know when. But you're getting to a point where the illusion of the horse race itself will collapse, that it won't be tenable. But they obviously tried, they said, to change the media narrative between the vice presidential debate on, Tuesday, and the event in St. Louis on Sunday evening. So they got all those days to keep the horse race going. And the horse race means viewers, ratings, money, influence, attention, glamour, all the things that, of course, everybody wants. But it seems to me that this is what's going on. Now, in the minds of these media characters, I think the way this problem presents itself is not maybe so crude. In other words, these are people who have mastered the art of deceiving themselves before they deceived anybody else. And the way they would see it is, well, we have to be even-handed, right? We really gave the Republicans a hard time for that first presidential debate. Okay, we did that. But now we've got to, keep up our reputation. In other words, if people are going to believe us and listen to us, we've got to show that we're not complete partisans, that we can recognize a Republican success when it happens. So therefore, we're going to make this one, we're going to dish this one up as a Republican success. Whereas, in fact, it didn't happen that way at all. So, the other interesting question, of course, is what is going on? Now, we're at a time of the splintering of political institutions. Man, are they splintering. The Democratic Party is holding up better, but that's when we come back, we'll see how some of these other political institutions are doing. Back in a minute. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. on this afternoon of the 7th of October, 2016. Now, we've just gone through an outline of the contest here. Let's also just continue a little bit more on Pence. A lot of people noticed that Pence did not defend Trump. He defended him in the sense of denying many of the things that Trump has manifestly said when these were posed as questions by Kaine. And Pence just said, no, no, he never said that. We never said that. I never said that. This is, of course, the famous Etch-a-Sketch moment, right? It's known as mendacity and prevarication. But that's what Pence did. And it's Orwellian. It's amazing. And the media thought, the style with which you prevaricate is more important than telling the truth to the American people. And in some of these cases, it's really important, right? In other words, do you want to cooperate with Russia and Putin, yes or no? Under what circumstances? You can't just fake that, from one public appearance to the next. But, of course, Pence thinks you do. Pence declined half a dozen times or more, 6+ occasions. He would put his head down, shake his head, look even more saturnine than usual, and just blow off the question, as Kaine then repeatedly pointed out. Kaine said, you're asking people to support a candidate that you cannot justify really heavy hitting on. The Democrats, of course, did the obvious thing. They made this montage of Kaine saying, did he say that? Pence says, no, he didn't say it. And then they show Trump saying it. In some cases, they also show Pence saying the same thing. So, what's going on? Is Pence going off the reservation? Is Pence now a defeatist? Is he less than 100% committed to an elusive victory in the general election in November? Has he been looking at those private polls? And if those private polls have put him in this kind of a mood, well, what does that say? Hey, Republican elected officials, Pence is showing you what you might want to do soon, right? He's putting distance between himself and the top of the ticket. This has been done before. You may remember in 2008, once we got about a little bit further into October than we are now, as I recall, we had some Saturday Night Live action where it was either Tina Fey or Governor Palin herself. This I don't know, where I can't remember. You could check it. they did a mockery of one of these debates, and at one point they had Palin going over to the side of the stage and in a stage whisper to the audience saying, look, I know this is not going to work this time around, but I'm planning my future, so you should support me and get ready to back me in this, that, and the other thing. Right? So that was so well known that it appeared on Saturday Night Live. The other one that I recall from quite a while ago is the guy who sort of started the practice of writing book-length analyses of U.S. presidential year election campaigns was, of course, Theodore H. White, who wrote The Making of the President. And one of the ones he did was The Making of the President 1964. And as I recall now, don't quote me because I haven't been able to find the chapter and verse, but the running mate for Goldwater was this guy, William Miller, congressman from upstate New York, very little known. I think Stephanie Miller, radio personality in our time, is his daughter. She's, of course, a liberal Democrat. Miller was a Goldwater Republican. But Goldwater said he put him on the ticket, that Miller got on the ticket because he drove LBJ crazy. And that's Miller was somebody that Goldwater wanted in order to do that. The problem was that by mid-October, say, that Miller had concluded that the campaign was hopeless. So he was on this whistle-stop campaign train, as I recall. And, you'd go across, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and every hour or two the train would stop. He'd go back to the platform at the back of the last car of the train. He'd give his speech. He'd go through the motions, do all that fine. Then he'd come back in and sit down with the newsmen for bourbon and cards. So it was, bourbon and cards, whistle-stop speech, bourbon and cards, whistle-stop speech, on and on and on. And everybody, all the news guys wanted to be with him because he was so affable. So that was his way of going off the reservation. So is Pence off the reservation? We don't know. But let's take a look at William Weld. Let's take a look, because this is really interesting. The same social dynamics that are rending the Republican Party, right? And we have to say, these social dynamics rending the Republican Party, right? Breaking it up, splintering it. Those are the ones that will lead to the party realignment being fulfilled, right? Being completed. That the Republicans will lose their ability to block and sabotage the government in Washington, D.C. The U.S. federal government will be beyond their reach if things go well. Now, in order for that really to happen, they're going to have to go pretty well, but it's possible. Because remember, this Tea Party Freedom Caucus is at most 60, 70, 80 people, right? Some members, some sort of informal hangers-on, and otherwise members. So let's take the example of William Weld. William Weld has said at different moments, right, he's been reported as saying that he would not want his efforts in the Gary Johnson, William Weld libertarian ticket. Weld does not want to be the Nader. He doesn't want to be Ralph Nader and held responsible for inflicting a whole administration of bad government on the American people. So he said that, and then that people thought he was going to drop out. Then later on he said that Hillary Clinton was really very well qualified, that she was the best qualified person running for office. And so he actually went further than Pence. And then finally, Weld has said now in the last couple of days that he feels his main task, his main mission in what remains of the campaign is to attack and criticize Trump and the Republican ticket, right? Weld, of course, liberal Republican, Boston Brahmin, right? The upper crust of the of Boston, right? So the aristocratic patrician kinds of people. So that's Weld. So look at this phenomenon of splintering, and That also means, by the way, don't waste your vote on that. That's a bad joke from the point of view of a presidential contender. I mean, I welcome what Weld is doing. I'm talking about the other guy, right? The candidate from Aleppo. And I don't want to make fun of Aleppo. Aleppo is a colossal tragedy, and it doesn't deserve to be made into a punchline for these American political shenanigans. So, a couple of comments here. Hot air, for whatever this is worth. They report as a hot story. Private polls by both parties show precipitous drop by Trump among key groups. So this is the New York Times article. And what they comment about it is this. This is dated October 6th by Allah Pundit. Not sure who Allah Pundit is, but we'll be back with the pearls of wisdom from Allah Pundit in just a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Please help me out. Go to americansystem.tv, and do yourself a favor. Buy a quality product at a token price. It's about the same as a visit to Starbucks, and you will get mental stimulation out of this. I promise you. So that would be the Kaine-Pence debate. A lot of these media characters say that they hoped that it would change the media narrative in favor of Trump. But as we already heard in that article from the New York Times, which I featured at the top of the show, apparently the Trump-Pence business has had almost no effect because people want to know, will Trump be a disciplined candidate? All of these questions that have been in the air since it seems time immemorial. So Hot Air, right-wing website, what they're interested in is if it's true that the down-ticket Republicans, the Senate and House in particular, are fixing to separate themselves from Trump. If that's a big if, right? We don't know that. That's just a report. Why is it the case, as it is, that Speaker of the House Paul Ryan is now campaigning with Trump on the weekend in Wisconsin, something that he was very reticent about doing, right? Is he trying to acquire a cover story, a fig leaf, essentially? So maybe he doesn't want people to be able to say, you, Ryan, left the candidate of the Republicans in the lurch, right? You didn't support him. He'll say, no, I was out that weekend campaigning with him. Because it would appear also that Trump is going to campaign all day Saturday. And I think the lesson of these debates is you got to be well rested, right? You've got to get extra sleep so that you're going to be optimistic. You can't go in there exhausted. And I think that was one of the problems with Nixon at the beginning of all this, was that he didn't quite grasp that. So look, Paul Ryan is going to campaign with Trump. So this Allah Pundit asks, is Ryan is this now the runaway stage for the down ballot Republicans? I mean, that's the implication of the New York Times. It's not the photo op stage anymore. It's the run for your life stage. Maybe Ryan has simply resolved to be a good soldier for the nominee in the home stretch, no matter what risks that might entail for his caucus. Do you think that will buy him any extra goodwill from Trump-loving, establishment-hating populists in the future? Or, that's one alternative offered by Allah Pundit on Hot Air, or is it that Ryan thinks we're perilously close to the, quote, Trump starts blaming Republicans for his looming defeat stage and wants to show, close quote, wants to show some team spirit in hopes of not being one of Trump's targets. Either way, the most important presidential debate in modern American history is three days away. We should also point out this constant refrain we hear that there's a mass of disgruntled white blue-collar workers who are very angry but very shy, and they haven't come out yet. But they're going to come out, and they're going to vote, and that's going to be really bad for the Democrats. I don't know. Just to sum up some of these considerations, right? You look at the Democratic operation is formidable, right? Just from the logistics point of view. The Trump operation has about, the Hillary Clinton operation has about 7 people in it who can go out and get a crowd. That would be Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Obama, Michelle, Biden, Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, 7 or 7 plus, right? Because there may be a couple of more. They can go out there. So a lot of them are out on the trail day to day. Whereas with Trump, you've essentially got Trump can do 2 rallies per day and Pence can do 2 rallies per day. And that's it. That's all they have. Whereas with these others, you know, there are so many of them that they can actually generate more action in terms of rallies, although the Democratic rallies are not as big, and they're not aimed at being that big. The Trump operation is rallies and nothing but, to the extent that they have a get-out-the-vote operation that is built into the rallies. That is, when you come to the rallies, there are these people wearing "Ask Me How to Vote," and they'll tell you how to vote. But will that be enough? And will these people actually vote? On the Democratic side, a lot of money has been invested since 2008 in data or big data. Can you identify your potential voters? Can you keep them interested with targeted emails on issues of interest to them? Do you have a get-out-the-vote operation? The word from Hillary has activated her happy volunteer operation, whatever that is. And from Hillary, the idea is it's better to go and talk to somebody by knocking on their door than by calling them up. Apparently phone calls are not as good as direct personal contact. You got to have field offices. She has more. You got to have volunteers. She has more. So you need to have all that. Hillary also can count on a certain number of Hollywood stars, like Barbara Streisand was out at least with emails this week. But with Trump, it comes down to this isolated group. Trump can do 2 a day. Pence can do 2 a day. And the get-out-the-vote operation is subsumed in that. Now, will that be enough? I think that's a very risky bet. Trump decided he didn't want to spend money on this. He decided that he wanted the Republican National Committee to do it. I think that was a false economy, short-sighted and a false economy. So let's see. I think we said before that the Democrats are considered to have a 52% chance to win the Senate. Others say a 56% chance. New York Times says Hillary has an 82% chance to win the election. Trump only 18%. Daily Kos has 86%. We've been looking at a lot of them. Some say Hillary's at 259 in the Electoral College. Others say 308 with 9 states competitive. And those 9 also tend to be the ones where the Senate races are competitive. So we'll have more to say about that next week. And we'll be back in a minute right now on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, we got to shift. We got to get into this other big thing, which is going to profoundly influence the U.S. election. That is what's going on in Syria. The first thing is, let me try to reassure people, right? I think the irresponsible media, the Russophobic media, stimulated by the Russophobia, perhaps, of Governor Pence, have really tried to exaggerate and distort what Secretary Kerry said. Now, I'm not the president of the John Kerry fan club. I'm not. I'm a critic. But let's not make it worse than it needs to be. It's probably bad enough. But here's the idea. The major media is telling you that Kerry has accused Russia of war crimes. Wrong. Didn't happen, to coin a phrase. Here's what he says. This is now Kerry speaking at a bilateral meeting between the French Foreign Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault, A-Y-R-A-U-L-T, and Kerry. This is at the UN, and it has to do with a French-Spanish resolution to restore the ceasefire and do some other things. But unfortunately, that French-Spanish resolution was not cleared with Russia nor with China before this thing was submitted. So here's what we have from Kerry. Quote, last night, the regime, Assad regime, Syria, attacked yet another hospital, and 20 people were killed and 100 people injured. Russia and the regime owe the world more than an explanation about why they keep hitting hospitals and medical facilities and women and children. Continuing, quote, these are actions that beg for an appropriate investigation of war crimes, and those responsible would and should be held accountable for those actions, says Kerry. Continuing, quote, they are beyond the accidental now, way beyond, years beyond the accidental. This is a targeted strategy to terrorize civilians and to kill anybody and everybody who is in the way of their military objectives. So close quote. Now, this does not say that the United States accuses Russia of a war crime. It does not say it. That is not asserted. And not only my own philological expertise tells me this, but I took the chance to listen to the State Department briefing here just before the show. And you had these people like Elise Labat of CNN and Matt of the Associated Press, who tends to be the dean of this group. They're questioning Admiral Kirby, right now the State Department spokes. And again, the U.S. is not accusing Russia of anything. The United States is not asserting Russian war crimes, only asking for an investigation. So in reality, it's quite similar to what Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov did in the wake of that Monday bombing of the Aleppo humanitarian aid convoy. Call for an investigation to establish facts. Now, there are different things going on. Let me just mention one thing. Ashton Carter, right? Ashton Carter with his factioneering. Gosh, what do we find? A2, page 2 of the Washington Post. Report cites misconduct by Ashton Carter's aide. For the past year, one of the biggest secrets at the Pentagon has been what prompted Defense Secretary Ashton B. Carter to suddenly fire his top military aide this a while ago. Carter unexpectedly removed Army Lieutenant General Ronald F. Lewis from his post in November for unspecified, quote, misconduct, unquote, and ordered the Defense Department Inspector General to investigate. The announcement came as a shock to many at the Pentagon, in part because three-star generals are rarely cashiered or disciplined. Cashiered means you're kicked out, fired. But mostly because Lewis was Carter's hand-picked selection for the position and had worked for him in other jobs. Now, the details of this are not relevant, so I'm putting that aside. But what may be relevant is the fact that this appears in a relatively prominent place in the Washington Post. Right now, today, may be some kind of a signal or a response or a repost or something, retaliation maybe, for people who don't like what Ashton Carter is doing. They may feel that it would be politically damaging to oust Ashton Carter now before the election, right? You don't want to do that. That would have incalculable consequences. Not a good thing. So they're trying to get Ashton Carter to talk less, keep his head down, and stop this tendency that he has, obviously, to not be in full cooperation with the president's policies, right? That he represents in some ways this neocon point of view, right? You get it. So that's something. There is undoubtedly now a large campaign to get the U.S., to con the U.S. into attacking Assad, right? That is sort of what's behind the scenes here. Again, this has to start with Obama. I think if you want to give Obama good advice, tell him, Mr. President, don't attack Assad. That would be insane. And it's not even clear people would go along with it, if you see what I mean. In other words, it's not clear that such an order could ever be followed. Let's see if I can find a couple of somewhat what can we say, authoritative people about this. We have this group called the White Helmets. Right? There's a group called the White Helmets. And the White Helmets, they're being promoted all over the U.S. TV as these heroes of Reconstruction and how they save people and they're selfless and they do all these wonderful things. But unfortunately, they are not what they're cracked up to be. The general idea is the Kuwait incubator babies. Instead of having the Kuwait incubator babies all there, in one hospital, we're getting a series of tragic cases, to be sure, right? Tragic. But these cases are being used to stimulate, large movements of public opinion in favor of terrible, terrible outcomes, a vast escalation, a vast multiplication by some kind of military intervention. I wanted to point out once again, what I assert here is that the Ashton Carter faction is simply a group of neocons, and that this group has its own point of view, but that the State Department as a whole and the uniformed military services in the Pentagon, they're not in agreement with that. Just not. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, Kerry does not accuse Russia of war crimes. I deplore and condemn and regret what Kerry did say, but it's not as bad as what you're being told. And in effect, I am hoping for a pragmatic or practical division of labor between Russia taking care of terrorists in Syria and the United States working with Peshmerga, YPG Kurds, Iraqi army, above all, in Iraq to take care of the terrorists there. And this can go very, very fast. The first thing I'd like to point out, in line with that thing I'm saying, that the Ashton Carter faction is not the faction of the uniformed military. And unfortunately, a lot of people have just dropped this whole issue, right? The people who called it to the attention of the world need to go further with this. But when we had General Joseph Dunford at the Congress for hearings a little while ago, he was adamant that the attempt to enforce a no-fly zone in Syria would mean war for the United States with both Syria and Russia. So when you look at those humanitarian, right, those cynical, diabolical humanitarian ads showing these poor little kids, remember that what they're advocating is a no-fly zone, and this is when we've heard it, right? Both campaigns, both Hillary Kane and Trump Pence want this. It's unacceptable. So what Dunford said was, and paraphrasing, he said, an attempt to enforce a no-fly zone over Syria would mean war with Russia and with Syria, so I am not likely to give that order. Maybe we ought to think about the possibilities of the uniformed military to simply say, we refuse to carry out illegal orders, right? This is what Hayden said. We refuse that, and therefore we won't do it. Go get a declaration of war. Otherwise, this is illegal. This would be a real war with Russia. This would not be some fake thing. We don't want it. It's not worth it. Over what? 300 terrorist gangs? 300 crazies who hate the United States? Assad has never attacked the United States. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and these crazy groups all have in one way or another, right? Not that we're not buying into any official versions of anything. Now, what else is going on? The climactic struggle for Mosul is about to begin. We had Ambassador McGurk today at the State Department briefing. He says that Manbij, we followed that here, right? Manbij was a hornet's nest. He claims we have 15 terabytes of information about the worldwide terrorist network of ISIS, and these people are going to be rounded up. 18 bigwigs have been slain by drones and others, including the vice caliph, and a lot of them have run away. Very interesting. He picks up the themes you've heard here so many times. He says, look at that 98-kilometer stretch of the border, right? 198, 60 miles. It is no longer under the control of ISIS. It is now under the control of Turkey and what he calls moderate groups. But again, it's not ISIS. The Turks have the ISIS has been driven out of Jarablus. There's also this question of Dabik. Dabik is the magazine of the ISIS forces. This refers to a kind of apocalyptic battle, a kind of Armageddon in the Muslim tradition, right? That's a prelude to the end of the world. But right now, ISIS is about to get kicked out of Dabik. In Raqqa, a coalition of Arabs and Kurds is readied to govern all the notables. The liberation, in short, of Mosul is in sight. A force of 30,000 troops has been assembled, including Peshmerga, YPG, Iraqis, 14,000 what they call tribal forces, police, millions. They're ready to deal with 1 million displaced persons. They found that the example of Sharqat, which we followed here, captured by the Iraqis on the way north to Mosul, was good. What happened in Sharqat was an uprising by the population against ISIS. This may be the strategy here, that they're looking for an uprising against ISIS. And if that's what happens in Mosul, then they can effectively pocket the rest of them. There is a question, will ISIL evacuate Mosul? Will they be forced out by an uprising? The Iraqi forces have proceeded about 100 kilometers up the Tigris River Valley, and they have had significant military success. Now, the Kerry Hérault meetings about this French-Spanish thing, we mentioned them. So when you now see this, attempt to pull at your heartstrings for the tragic victims of this, remember, who brought those killers in there in the first place? Those are jihad, they are takfiris, they are lunatics. Those people are antithetical to civilization. Who brought them in there? Let's look at Saudi Arabia. Let's look at Turkey. Let's look at the United Arab Emirates. Let's look at factions in the U.S. intelligence community, and on and on. That's who did that. So you're going to go bomb Assad, who has been fighting these people the whole time on the basis of some theory. And remember that, the United States bears a significant degree of the responsibility, as do others who let this happen. The word from the U.S. military about ISIS in Iraq is that the ISIS people have their backs to the wall. The no-fly zone is not the way to go. It would also require, in addition to 2 to 3 weeks of bombing, it would require 75,000 U.S. forces to be committed to this mild-sounding, anodyne-sounding notion of a no-fly zone, or better yet, even worse, a safe zone. It won't be safe. Who's going to keep it safe? 75,000 U.S. forces. How many will die? And then what kind of ads will you make? The people who do this, there's an interesting article. You should take a look now. On Alternet. Alternet has Sidney Blumenthal Jr., the son, I guess, of the advisor, the famous advisor, so demonized and vilified by the Republicans. Sidney Blumenthal, the confidant of Madame Clinton, his son writing on Alternet about how there's this public relations campaign. We've seen these in the past, right? From Jessica Lynch to the Kuwait incubator babies to so many others, right? This, again, this attempt to bring it down to a first-person account. That's what you're being subjected to. So you have to say no. What could be the way out of this? Well, the obvious way out of it is that the Russian and Syrian forces break the power of this terrorist grouping that's still attempting to hold on to eastern Aleppo. Get them out of there. Staffan de Mistura of the United Nations says he'd be delighted to go there personally and lead the terrorist rebel fighters out of the area and I guess back into Turkey, where I guess we're tacitly admitting they all came from. But the bombing of Assad, the idea that you'd go from kids getting bombed in Aleppo to the bombing of Assad, this is a piece of absolute insanity. And not just practical insanity, but also then moral insanity. What in God's name would you be doing there? So with this, we then go to Sunday night. We're told that the dynamic of a town meeting is that a reporter can ask you a question and you can simply dodge it. You can blow it off. You can evade it. You can pivot. But when it's a real person talking to you about some of the sometimes tragic facts of their own lives, that's much harder to do. And you got to provide an answer. You can't just commiserate. It can't just be, I feel your pain and let me describe the situation and let me read it. They want to know what you're going to do. And again, Mrs. Clinton, mass traction, anti-austerity, class-based economic plans are the most effective. So that's the way to go. See you next week, World Crisis Radio. Catch us in the meantime at AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv. And good luck to all.